today we are reading chapter 4 to chapter 6. I hope you like it and subscribe. Thank you for listening. Let's get on to it. Chapter 4, Building the Pyramids. How was it possible for the Egyptians to build the immense pyramids? Khufu's pyramids alone consist of 2.3 million stone blocks. The average one weigh 2.5 tons, about as much as a small pickup truck. But some stones used for the pharaoh's burial chamber weigh as much as 80 tons. A moderate 18-wheeler truck can only carry a load about one-fourth that heavy, and the Egyptians moved these stones with human power alone. How did they do it? The honest answer is nobody really knows, but scientists have made some guesses. Workers must have cut the stones from quarries on the opposite side of the Nile or farther away at Aswan in the south. The workers probably used copper chisels, although none have been found in the quarries. So another way of splitting the stones have been suggested. This was to drive pieces of wood into cracks in the stone, then water was poured into the cracks. When the wood swelled up, the stone would break. Each pharaoh probably chose the spot for this own pyramid. The ground had to be smooth and leveled. The pyramid rests on a square base and has 4 sides. Each corner points to a direction of the compass. The most amazing thing about the pyramids was moving the huge stones. First, they had to be brought down the Nile on wooden boats made from cedar that came from Lebanon. From the river, they were moved to the building area. There were several ways this might have been done. One suggestion is that a canal was built from the Nile. Another idea is that workers built a causeway or stone roads that led to the pyramid area. The huge stones had to be dragged along this road on sleds. A wheeled cart holding something that heavy would be crushed. A picture on a tomb wall showed men using ropes to drag a wooden sled that held such a stone. Recently, scientists have suggested a special method of dragging the stones across the soft sand. Once the stones reached the building site, a new problem arose: how to move them up the side of the pyramid. Using ramps made of stone or wood seems like the only possible answer. A moderate engineering company showed that 2.5-ton concrete blocks could be dragged up a ramp by 18 men at a rate about 20 yards per minute. That raises 2 other questions. How long would the job take, and how many workers would be needed? The ancient Greek historian Herodotus thought thousands of slaves built the pyramids, but modern scientists doubt that slaves were used. They have found the remains of workers' settlements. There were houses with clothing for both men and women, and even children's toys. That meant the workers lived with their families. Evidence also shows that they ate bread, onions, and garlic, and drank beer 3 times a day. At the end of the 9-day Egyptian week, they had a feast of grilled fish or fowl, along with wine. This was better food than slaves would have had. There was a workforce that labored on the pyramids all year round. During flooding seasons, these workers were helped by farmers who had spare time. In return, the farmers probably had their taxes lowered. Scientists used different computer models to figure out how many workers were needed for the Great Pyramid of Khufu. The best guess is between 15,000 and 30,000 workers over a period of at least 10 years. The pyramid had to be finished before the pharaoh died. By comparison, Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris took almost 200 years to build, from AD 1163 to 1345. The workers were divided into gangs of 200 men. Then each gang was split into teams of 20. Some were so proud of their work that they left the name of their group on the walls inside the pyramid. Some names were Victorious Gang, Enduring Gang, and even Drunk Gang. One crew were Friends of Khufu. In a sense, each pyramid was built from the inside out. Food, clothing, and treasures that the king would need in the afterlife were placed in the burial chamber. While it was still open to the outside, then the rest of the pyramid was built around it. Narrow corridors were made to connect the chamber to the outside world. The Egyptians were still aware that robbers often stole the treasures from tombs, so workers built false chambers and long corridors that led nowhere. It was dangerous to enter a maze if you did not know the correct way in and out. Chapter 5. Living Forever. Since the pharaoh himself was a god, it was expected that he would go from his life to another when he died. He would live with the gods. The pyramid was a place where the pharaoh's body could be protected. Eternal life began with a journey through the underworld. The Ka, or life force, left but the body at death. And then, after burial, the Ba, or soul, followed. Horus guided the dead to the hall of judgment. Waiting there was a god Anubis. Anubis had the head of a jackal. The jackal was known for digging up graves and eating the dead. He weighted the dead person's heart on a scale. Against a feather, Horus's ruler to the underworld stood by watching along with other gods. If the heart was too heavy, then a monster who was part hippo, part lion, part crocodile ate it. No happy afterlife. But if the feather balanced the heart, then the Ba and the Ka united to form the Ak. The Ak needed a body to re-enter and make it live again. All the pleasures of earthly life would continue to prepare the body for this happy existence. Egyptians developed methods to preserve the body after death. This is what is known as mummification. When the pharaoh died, his body was brought by boat to the temple near his pyramid. Mummification began by washing the body. This was not just to clean it. Water was thought to make the body pure and ready for rebirth. The next step was to remove the inner organs, which decayed quickly. Embalmers took out the brain by inserting hook-shaped tools through the nostrils. The skull was then packed with linen, also through the nostrils. After that, embalmers cut open the abdomen and removed the stomach, intestines, lungs, and liver. The brain was thrown away. It was not considered important. The other organs were placed in natron, a kind of salt. The natron would dry them out. The organs were then put in special jars and placed with the body in the tomb. The heart was left inside the body, for Egyptians believed it contained a person's intelligence and memory. It had to remain under the person's direct control. The longest step in the process was to dry the entire body in the natron. Sometimes bags of natrons were placed inside the stomach cavity as well. To fully dry a body took about 40 days. Because the fingernail and toenails would fall off during the process, they were tied on with thread. Drying made the body shrink, so embalmers filled it with linen and sawdust. That way the body looked more natural. The skin was softened with sweet-smelling oils. These oils also prevented bacteria from decaying the body. Just as modern embalmers do, the Egyptians applied cosmetics to the dead. Some mummies had been found with hair extensions or wigs. The eye sockets were filled with fake eyes, and features like eyebrows were pounded on them. Finally, the body was wrapped in linen bands. Each arm and leg was separately wrapped before the embalmers covered the entire body. Priests said prayers at each step of the wrapping process. Sometimes religious charms were placed inside the linen bands. They were supposed to ward off evil spirits. The priest who did the mummifying wore a mask with a head of a jackal. It made him look like the god Anubis. At the end of the process, the priest used a special tool to cut open the wrapping over the mouth of the mummy. This would allow the dead person to speak. Afterward, the mummy was placed inside the coffin, which was usually made of wood. An image of the pharaoh's face and body was painted on the coffin. A funeral procession would follow it along the stone causeway to the tomb. There, while priests chanted spells and prayers, the coffin was stood upright. A high priest touched the eyes, nose, lips, ears, hands, and feet on the coffin. This was to open them for the afterlife. Then the coffin was carried into the tomb until it reached the burial chamber. It was put inside a sarcophagus. This was a larger chest, usually made of stone in the shape of a body. An image of these dead pharaoh's face was on sarcophagus. These images were often covered with gold because gold was believed to be the flesh of the gods. Now the pharaoh was ready for his journey to the afterlife, the land of the gods. Chapter 6. Building for the Ages. Around 2375 BC, one of the last pyramids of the Old Kingdom era was built. It was intended for the pharaoh Unas. It was usual because for the first time the walls inside were covered with hieroglyph. This writing was for a number of spells or prayers. They were intended to help the dead person find his way through the underworld. Modern scientists called them pyramid tents. Centuries after Unas' time, such spells were written on scrolls that ordinary people could buy like pharaohs. Those who purchased them wanted to live forever too. Collection of those spells are called the Book of the Dead. About a century after Unas' time, the pyramid building stopped. Probably a series of droughts kept the annual floods from occurring. More people had to work on farms just to survive. Around 2100 BC, the pharaohs lost their power for a time until another powerful family united the country again. The era was known as the Middle Kingdom began. The new pharaohs tried to continue the old ways. They even built a few new pyramids, but the new tombs were not as large and grand as the Old Kingdom ones. They were built of mud bricks, which didn't last as well as the earlier pyramids. Today, the Middle Kingdom pyramids look like heaps of rubble. The last pyramid were built around 1790 BC. At the beginning of the New Kingdom, 1550 BC, the pharaohs began to build the huge monuments to themselves. These were not pyramids, however. They were tombs carved out of the rock cliffs in the Valley of the Kings. Across the Nile from the Thebes, along with them were enormous temples like the ones at Thebes, dedicated to the god Anu-Re. It covers almost over 61 acres. 10 of the cathedrals of Europe could fit inside it. The pharaohs Antef III constructed 2 huge statues of himself in front of his tomb. 60 feet high, these statues long puzzled archaeologists. They appeared to be made from solid rock, but no one could understand how they were brought to the site. Then, modern scientists discovered that the Egyptians of that time had made them out of stone surly, a kind of clay that appears to be solid rock when dry. Egypt had thrived under its pharaohs for thousands of years, but at last it began to weaken. The people high up the river, the Nubians, in present-day Sudan, had long been under Egyptian control. Around 750 BC, a Nubian warrior, Pai, brought his forces down the Nile. In only a year's time, the Nubians conquered Egypt. Pai was the first in a series of black pharaohs, dark-skinned Africans who ruled the country. Pai and his descendants had great respect for Egyptian culture. They did not destroy the ancient monuments. Instead, they copied Egyptian customs into their own land. Today, there are more pyramids in Nubia than there are in Egypt. A series of other conquerors ruled Egypt, and finally it became part of the Roman Empire. Egypt would not regain its independence until modern times. Around 1600, European travelers and merchants began to bring some souvenirs of Egypt, small statues, jewelries, even mummies when they could be found. Europeans often ground up the mummies and used them as medicine. In 1798, a new conqueror appeared on the horizon, Napoleon Bonaparte, future emperor of France. He brought scientists and artists along with his army. One of his artists later published a series of books showing the Great Pyramids and other wonders. They were bestsellers all over Europe and set off a craze for Egyptian styles in furniture, pottery, and even architecture. An English poet wrote, "Everything must now be Egyptian. The ladies wear crocodile ornaments. One must sit on Sphinx in a room hung with mummies. Well, enough to make children afraid to go to bed." The world has never lost its interest in ancient Egypt. In 2010, more than 14 million tourists came to Egypt to see the pyramids and the Sphinx. Thank you for today. I hope you like it. Like and subscribe.